Hey everybody, it's John Pollock here alongside Jimmy Korderas. We're coming out of Sunday's Extreme Rules event from Baltimore, Maryland at the Royal Farms Arena. Yeah. And this was, what an extreme night, Jimmy.
Well, Extreme Rules seem to be more rules than extreme.
It feels as though watching this show that the concept of Extreme Rules, it's fine that you want to have this show, but it seems to me it becomes one of those square peg in a round hole kind of issues that they have where they want to promote this show but do it in such parameters that I think in some cases it was a detriment to the match. Like The Miz and Ambrose, for instance. I just felt this whole match, it was just, first of all, it was the antithesis of Extreme Rules. It was a concept designed as the opposite of it.
Right.
And I think the audience is just trying to understand the logic of the match so much that some of the rules, I think, did hurt some of the matches. So, I mean, this is always, we discuss this every year with Extreme Rules. It becomes this balancing act for the company. And the match that really didn't have a ton of quote-unquote extreme to it, that main event, there was, tons of leeway with the rules. I mean, that was far and away the best match on the show. I don't think there's any debate.
No, I don't think you can debate that at all. I thought the main event was actually presented very well. I mean, you had, especially in a situation like that where you have 5 guys in a match and could easily turn into a cluster really quick. But
yeah, it was paced very well.
Whoever laid out the pacing of that match did a hell of a job, and you got to give credit to the guys because you can put stuff down on paper and say, here's how we're going to do stuff, but it's up to the guys to deliver, and all 5 guys delivered in that match.
It was almost like a lot of kind of Royal Rumble creativity into it, where you had the alliance of Bray Wyatt and Samoa Joe. I never felt it was ridiculous when you took a guy out of it, like Seth taking the DDT on the steps. He was out for a long time, and it didn't feel as though he was just playing dead. I just thought they rotated as well as you could with 5 guys. I'm not always the biggest fan of the multiple man matches, but when it's done really effectively and you have 5 guys where I think at least 3 to 4 of them you had a believability could win the match, that added to the intrigue, and they had lots of time. I mean, they finished this show with 20 minutes left in the hour. I thought it was going to go even longer than 30 minutes.
Yeah, I think it could have gone longer, but I think, right around the 29th, we'll get to the exact time later.
Oh, yes, our contest.
But, the 29-30 minute mark I thought was just perfect because sometimes you run the risk of going a little bit too long, and once you get people to a point, you want to get people to a high point and have them leave on that high point, and I think they accomplished that very well in that match, especially, with the eventual winner, Samoa Joe.
Yeah, everyone was taken out, and Balor, he hits the coup de grace, and he's right on the verge of victory. And Balor had been out for a while, so he makes the big Superman comeback. And then out of nowhere, Joe, who had been playing dead on the floor, comes back, locks on the coquina clutch, and Balor passes out. I thought it was a great finish.
Yes.
Put a ton of steam on that finish, which has been incredibly well protected since Joe has been called up to the main roster. And it sets up a fresh matchup with Brock Lesnar, and yeah, I thought that it was really well done, this main event.
Oh, I totally agree. And,
highlight of the show.
Yeah, exactly. And for people complaining, okay, guys, it's 2017 here. When people are tweeting me, hey, I thought he had to raise his hand 3 times before. No, dude. I mean, come on.
Don't come at Jimmy with that stuff.
No. Okay, maybe in the 80s that was the way you did it because it was a little cartoonish. Now
I'll be honest, Jimmy, nostalgia aside, I never liked that. I never was a fan of it. I always thought it looked ridiculous because it's supposed to be like a simulated chokehold where you would not be checking the guy if he goes out cold. And I think especially in, you have to adapt to what is surrounding you at this point. You're not, Big John McCarthy isn't lifting up a guy who's gone limp.
The only thing I may have changed with that is the referee did check his arm briefly to see that it was limp. But almost like you said, like an MMA kind of finish where the referee, before ringing the bell, because obviously the referee called for the bell, then called for Joe to release the hold, almost like an MMA style where Balor's passed out, have the referee dive in there to break it up, like real shoot style, to make that believability factor and to make it more realistic. That's the only thing. That's very, very nitpicky.
Joe is presented as very close to a a MMA fighter. I mean, that is very much the Joe character as well.
Which makes him and Brock Lesnar that much more intriguing and appealing. And if anybody stuck around for Raw Talk afterwards and heard Joe speaking afterwards,
very good.
That was excellent.
Yeah, this is definitely the biggest focus Joe has had. I really hope they go outside of their comfort zone for the build-up to this match. This should not be we're just doing promos back and forth in the ring every week and Joe doing matches. I want a totally different style of build, as though it's a fight. Yep. Very much the Kurt Angle, Samoa Joe build they did for Lockdown in 2008, which they went completely away from their usual style of promotion, and it was one of the most successful pay-per-views TNA ever promoted, and then never went back to that concept for whatever reason.
Right.
So I really hope that they're very creative and in this build-up, because the Lesnar and Joe characters, this match should not be promoted as just any other WWE style main event.
No, and they've already started a little bit with, especially with Corey Graves presenting it as the dream match that the WWE Universe has been looking forward to, which is a good start, at least to the build. What I'd like to see from the match itself, it's kind of like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I'm glad that this match is happening. I'm almost like, but why at Great Balls of Fire? I wish this was on a bigger stage, like a SummerSlam or even Survivor Series or Royal Rumble, whatever. But at the same time, if they can creatively get through this match, kind of like, I'm going to go back to the old original Rocky movie, not Rocky 14 or whatever, but the first movie, at the end of the movie, when the bell rings at the end of the fight, and Rocky and Apollo Creed are kind of leaning on each other, exhausted and so forth. And Apollo Creed is whispering into Rocky's ear, there ain't going to be a rematch. There ain't going to be no rematch. And Rocky whispers back, I don't want one. Because they just, fought almost to the death against each other. That's the kind of finish that could, especially if this is going to be a one-and-done kind of deal, at least that you can go back to later and say, hey, man, I'm looking forward to this rematch.
Yeah, I guess people are... you can look at it that you would want more of a sustained program between these two, because Brock is the one guy that, he is very much figured in. His programs need to be known in advance, and I think everyone anticipates Braun Strowman being back in the mix in time for SummerSlam. Right. But you can get a great build out of this. Joe doesn't have to necessarily be hurt with a loss if it's done properly. You can do a lot. There's a lot of options on the table. I almost like the idea that the next time Brock is on Raw, that there is just a chaotic pull apart where they have to be separated, very much like the Undertaker brawl they did a few years ago, and they are not allowed near each other until July the 9th, and you make it this big spectacle, because so many times we start with a feud, Jimmy, where you've got to build up to that buzz, and I think you're starting with that buzz with these two. You don't have to do the extra legwork to get to that momentum.
You don't want to go in the reverse, like you're saying, kind of like with the Alexa Bliss Bayley thing, where it started off good and then we got that Monday night.
Each week you took away from interest instead of built it, and that happens a lot with some of these feuds,
which they brought up last night on the pay-per-view.
Well, yes, that will. I'm sure that will be making some kind of list for the company at some point. We will get into that, but really solid main event to me. Absolutely. It was the high point of the show. And close to it, I thought, was the Cruiserweight title match. I really enjoyed this with Neville and Austin Aries. A surprise finish, I feel, in Neville retaining the title and kind of bringing this to a conclusion. It feels like submitting Aries. This is their third straight pay-per-view match, and I just thought they had a great match. The crowd was, I wouldn't say at the low point that we've heard for other Cruiserweight matches at this level, but I was kind of disappointed when Neville finally locked on that Rings of Saturn, and the audience just didn't seem to care. But they were a fantastic match, I thought, built around the submissions.
Yeah, I love the thing. The thing about this match is the Cruiserweight division as a whole, kind of people are, I guess, having different expectations from the Cruiserweights. They think back to, I guess, WCW days for Cruiserweights. But these two guys are not only excellently talented in the ring and can accomplish a lot, like, as far as stylistically and move-wise. These guys have told a fantastic story throughout the match, especially under the guidelines of the stipulation of the match, which was a submission rules match. And again, people getting confused. Okay, I'm going to go off on a little thing here.
Go for it.
when the WWE, incorporates these stipulations in these matches, whether it's the Extreme Rules pay-per-view, whether it's a submission match, or if the champion gets disqualified, he could lose it. Whatever the situation, the cage match where both. I mean, yes, wording is important, but they have to explain this to the audience ahead of time so people can understand the concept of what they're trying to accomplish here. And I think it hurt in the storytelling process. Great match. Love the match. I thought it was great, and because I understood stuff like when they get to the ropes, they have to break. Because the match cannot end in the ropes, or it cannot end outside the ring, and that's why the referee is implementing a 5 count, and that's why he's implementing his 10 count outside the ring, because the stipulation of the match is you have to win by submission, but it doesn't mean you can't lose the match by DQ or you can't lose the match by count out. So there's still a champion's advantage in the match, but they don't explain that, so the audience gets confused by it and go, well, why is the referee trying to break him off the rope and stuff? So that's my only beef with that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a valid criticism. I felt that, when you watch the Cruiserweights, especially on a pay-per-view and sometimes even Raw, I think it really shines a light on the fact that the majority of that audience is not watching 205 Live. No. It was staggering last week when Way and I put out just this question to people of, people listening to this kind of a show, who's watching 205 Live? And I expected 50-50 responses. It was so one-sided of people that, at best, are cherry-picking a match if they hear it's really good, that are not watching 205 Live. And this, to me, is the audience that would be most likely to be watching more wrestling and don't feel there is that limit to how much they can fit into their weekly viewing habits. But 205 Live, there's many options out there. 205 Live is not a big priority to even your ardent wrestling fan. So I ask, who is watching this?
Right. It's interesting because it all goes back to connecting with your audience and familiarity with the superstars, the characters being presented. And I guess that's the goal with Monday Night Raw, is to present these guys, intermittently into the Monday night programming, because they do have 3 hours. But at the same time, I feel like there's a disconnect between them and the regular roster. It's not like NXT, which is its own entity, its own brand, which is separate from Raw and SmackDown. It's almost like they're trying to integrate these guys in, but they still feel like they're not part of the group. Like you're part of the program, but you're not in the inner circle, kind of thing.
So Neville retains the title. We will see now where the Cruiserweight division moves. I think Neville's been fantastic with the title. The question is just who are those next programs for him? So much has been centered on these two, and to a lesser extent, TJ Perkins, of who are your babyface options if they're going to bring Rich Swann back into the mix. I mean, these are things that they have seen already, and it's just trying to come up with new ideas for kind of a limited amount of guys that are viable in that picture.
Right. I like Jack Gallagher. I just wish he'd lose the umbrella Mary Poppins thing. I mean, I get it. It's kind of funny, but...
Steel cage match.
Okay.
This was kind of funny. Yeah. So this was an escape the cage. That was the rules here. That was how you had to win.
Yep.
And this drove me nuts because... So the logic of this match is you have to abandon your partner and leave him outnumbered in order to win this match. You have to put your team at a disadvantage in order to win the match. So that's what happened, where Jeff is out of the cage, leaving Matt for dead in there with the Wolves, to the point that Jeff has to re-enter the match because he's a good person, to thus disadvantage them from the goal of winning the match. And then it's Jeff that ends up costing them the match because he can't escape fast enough. And I just don't... Like, imagine this concept, Jimmy, where you and I were going to have a match together, and the winner is the one to get out of the ring and sprint to the back fastest. What the hell's been accomplished here? Well, anyway, this all came to a the crowd was very much into this match. I don't want to downplay that. The audience was still into this, but to me, it was Cesaro and Sheamus won an obstacle course, and the escape concept to me was just... I don't know. Didn't get me into it.
I mean, it's not the first time that we've had this type of match, especially a tag team cage match, because I remember way back when it was, again, the Hardy Boyz versus Edge and Christian. It was a similar circumstance, but the only thing that was different back then was not the added wording when they announced at the beginning of the match where they said that both members of the team have to be outside the cage and on the floor to win the match at the same time. Now, that being said, goes back to what I said before. They didn't explain clearly. Again,
I don't think anyone knew these rules beforehand because I don't think they had ever been announced on TV.
Exactly. So people don't know the concept of, okay, Jeff had to come in and save his brother from the 2-on-1 onslaught from Cesar and Sheamus, but by re-entering the cage, it reestablishes him as being a participant inside the cage and has to escape again for a second time. So again, confusion there, and people didn't understand that. So, that's why I say sometimes you have to explain these things instead of assuming that everybody will kind of like read between the lines and get it.
Yeah, this was one to me where just the actual concept hurt what the match was. And so Cesaro and Sheamus win this, which was almost the only option at this point, given Matt Hardy's interview before on the pre-show explaining we beat them in a ladder match, we beat them in a regular match. He failed to add that they beat them in every singles match that the two teams have had.
True.
So we now go into this match, which also begged the question why this team is still your number one contenders after all of these sound defeats. Maybe Bayley will have an answer for that after her latest loss. But Cesaro and Sheamus win the tag titles. What do you see as next for the tag scene? Because the Revival are just about to return, and where do they fit into the mix as well? I'd like to see a Revival Hardys program.
I think, a Revival Hardys program because,
There's no one for the champions.
There's no one for the champions. There's no babyface team out there to challenge. You can make a case for Enzo and Cass, but it almost seems like they're going in a different direction, especially with all these backstage beatings that Enzo's taking. So there really is nobody left for the champions.
Unless going for the tag titles and failing leads to Cass and Enzo imploding, which is kind of what you just did with the Golden Truth, but that seems to be the way they're going with Enzo and Cass. So it's not a very deep tag division on Raw at the moment.
No, not at all.
They could have used American Alpha, I think, on Raw at this point.
Yeah, I think so.
Because they're not being used on SmackDown.
No.
Let's chat about the kendo stick on a pole match.
Oh, gee.
So there's at least a multiple choice question now of what was the worst Alexa Bayley segment of the week, because we have the match and we have This Is Your Life. This match ended out of nowhere with Bayley finally getting the kendo stick, hesitating, so Alexa nailed her with the kendo stick and followed with a DDT and one clean. Very flat ending, I thought, to all of this. And I guess the story is that Bayley she is guilty of the criticisms Alexa has placed upon her. But yeah, this came across just very flat to me, and I think the same story could have been told just more effectively, where I feel like all of this was built around Bayley reaching that breaking point, and you could have still had her go too far, and it cost her the match, but I really feel that wasn't executed here.
No, not at all. And the tough thing about Bayley, the way she's being presented is, like I do most times, I try to understand why they do certain things, and I get where they were going with it. Like you said, Bayley trying to be bigger than resorting to such tactics to win matches and stuff like that. But the 80s, mid-80s style babyface, the goody two-shoe babyface, or the Bob Backlund, gosh golly gee babyface, it's 2017. It doesn't work anymore. And even with young kids nowadays, it's kind of tough to get a babyface over like that. It almost feels like they tried to recreate from a few years ago the John Cena Bray Wyatt deal, where Bray Wyatt was trying to get John Cena to go down into that dark place he doesn't want to go to in order to defeat him, and it almost felt that kind of a presentation, but wasn't nearly executed as well, and it's hurting Bayley. It really is hurting Bayley, and whether
you heard like there was a mixture of a reaction for her, which has not been the case throughout this whole time. I mean, she's largely been a pretty solid babyface with her reactions, and it was a mixed reaction that Bayley acknowledged with her reaction when they introduced her at the beginning of the match.
No, it's all in the presentation, because you had this character in NXT that people saw the potential in and said, well, when she comes up to the main roster, she could be possibly the women's division's version of the next John Cena, and people legitimately saw that. I thought so too. I thought the possibility was there. But now the way she's being presented on Raw, I don't know if you can repair that.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of the criticism, people have said, oh, it's just the character doesn't transfer well to the main roster. But let's also look at the past 6 weeks of this character. She loses clean in her hometown. Mm-hmm. She then, the next night in a tag, gets pinned. And then that leads to this, where she's been bullied and pushed to the breaking point, and is beat cleanly again by Alexa. I mean, the audience, to their credit, they're not going to just rally around someone that there's no belief in, there's no confidence in, that they see as someone that is just the inferior part of the match.
And it's funny you brought up the whole thing. She's being bullied, and I'm not advocating this, but sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is you wrap one good rap in the mouth, right? Sometimes you got to do it. And you know, like I said, don't advocate doing this at home. I'm talking sports entertainment wise here, folks.
Yeah, leave the kendo sticks.
Yeah, leave the kendo
to the
sticks.
Parents.
Yeah. Let them discipline their own way. But anyways, you know what I mean. So in today's day and age, you can't have a white meat baby face like that. It doesn't work anymore. You have to have some kind of edge to you. And even the criticisms of John Cena today about him being very much a white meat baby face, he does go to that. You get that edge from him as well, and we're not seeing any edge from Bayley at all.
Yeah, and given just kind of how clean this ended, it almost feels like you have to take a departure from Bayley in this picture at the moment, and you can eventually maybe do the comeback where Alexa's had her number all these times, but it just feels there's no momentum to keep this going forward at the moment, and both need detour programs.
Exactly, and I guess it looks like Nia Jax is next in line, I guess.
They're teasing that, so that's one of the options. We had the Intercontinental title match that I mentioned earlier. They went 20 minutes to open up the show with The Miz defeating Dean Ambrose after Maurice slapped The Miz. The referee wouldn't buy on their attempt to get the disqualification. Then Miz threw Dean into the referee, and as Dean was pleading with the referee, Miz capitalized, hit the skull-crushing finale, and pinned him to win the Intercontinental title. This was one of those matches where the stipulation to me hurt the match, whereas without it, this would have been a stronger match because they had a fine match together, and I think it was the audience at home that was just calling into question the law. I think every single person expected the Maurice spot, and I felt that you could have just done it earlier in the match and ejected Maurice so that you felt that you were actually going to get a clear-cut winner. And with Maurice there, it was like this shadow over top of the match almost. The whole DQ stipulation was a lot for me in this one.
No, I agree with the whole Maurice thing. That kind of makes sense. Having her out there the entire match, you're wondering why it didn't happen sooner. That's oh, what a shock. Logical. But anyways, yes, adding that stipulation to the match, it's almost weird because you talk about, baby faces and heels in 2017 and how it's almost like a gray area now. Like the heels are actually cool and getting cheered, and the baby faces have to be more edgy and aggressive and that sort of thing. So it almost feels to me like, I don't know, it felt like that stipulation should have been placed on the heel champion where, you can't get disqualified to save your title. You have to actually, win the match by conventional methods to retain your title. So it kind of tells
it's so much better suited for that. If The Miz was constantly getting counted out or DQ'd as a weasel way to keep his title, and now he's backed into the corner. It makes Kurt Angle as a babyface commissioner look even sillier, putting his babyface champion in this situation. It was so backwards to me. And, I feel that after Maurice was ejected, they were able to work things into a finish where you did put some heat on The Miz by getting this title. But I just felt, especially for a long, drawn-out match that they were put in the position to have, again, it was just a case of the stipulation to me hurting a match, which shouldn't be the result of a stipulation. The stipulation should be the salt on the steak. It just enhances it. It doesn't ruin the taste of the match. No,
I absolutely agree. And I have to go back to Sunday night because I have to settle a little argument that occurred on.
You in an argument?
No, I wasn't in the argument. This was Jason Agnew and Mouth on Sunday night. They had a little disagreement about removing the turnbuckle pad in the corner and whether that constitutes throwing someone into that corner.
Oh, right.
A DQ. So there was a little. Let me clarify a little. It's a little bit of a long drawn out explanation, but here's the gist of it. Over the years, it's been done both ways, where it has been a DQ, it has not been a DQ. Basically, in storyline purposes, if the heel intentionally takes off, unties the turnbuckle pad to throw his opponent into it, usually that's looked upon as a disqualification. But if the pad comes off accidentally, then it's fair game, because that corner of the ring is still part of the ring. It's almost as part of the ring post, part of the steps. They are technically part of the ring. So it's not like you're introducing an extra object into the match to... If you throw a guy into the stairs, it's not a DQ. You get warned for it. If you throw a guy into the ring post, it's not a DQ. You get warned for it. But if the pad were to come off accidentally and you throw a guy into that corner, it's not a DQ, because that's part of the ring.
Shawn Michaels got up on British Bulldog on that Saturday night's main event.
Oh, man, you remember. You see, good memory, this guy. I forget this.
I remember that so well as a child, seeing that, because after that, I looked at that exposed steel buckle as the most deadliest object imaginable, because the British Bulldog was crippled by this.
Right.
So anyway, new champion, The Miz. I'm a fan of the title change, because I think both of these guys have really been hurt in this shakeup. Dean Ambrose, I don't have a grand solution, but changes, I think, need to be made. I think the goofiness of him has to be cut out. Not a wholesale change, because I don't think anyone anticipates that with Dean Ambrose, but he needs to be able to be adjusted, because he is just... He's lost at the moment to me on Raw.
Yeah, this whole I'm an anti-whatever rebel kind of thing, it's not working, especially, like you said, when he's like an actual lunatic, like a guy who looks unhinged and you don't know where he's going to go. That presentation is better. When he's the goofy kind of guy who comes out with a hot dog cart and stuff like that and acts goofy, that doesn't work.
And his promos, like the promos to me, they have to be more serious. Yeah. It's all just crappy punchlines and stand-up routine, and there's no attachment to him. Right. It's just if he wants to be in kind of that middle of the pack kind of role, well, that's where he's going to settle, as this character. I don't see this as a main event character on a show that drastically needs guys like him. So.
Absolutely. And you know, by contrast, you look at a guy like Samoa Joe and listen to his promos and listen to how he talks, like I said, especially on Raw Talk. Go back and watch it. I'm telling you.
He's not telling jokes. He's not trying to get in one-liners.
No.
Just direct, and it's building a match.
Exactly.
And rounding out the review, we had Rich Swann and Sasha defeating Alicia and Noam Dar. This was really like a house show style match. The baby faces go over and dance. And
I just didn't like the fact that the women at times look like more of a cat fight, almost regressing.
Yep.
As opposed to moving forward with the women's division.
And kind of a fun little add-on on the kickoff was Kalisto and Apollo Crews, who I thought had a really good match. That I don't know how many people watched it on the kickoff. They got a lot of time. Kalisto won with the Salida del Sol kicking off to Titus. Cool finish. And Apollo Crews, I just watched this guy. Like, he's one of those, like a Luke Harper or a Cesaro, who is a big guy that works so well with cruiserweights. And I know the show's called 205 Live. Every person reminded me of this, but I wrote out the fact that Crews, to me, would be such a better fit as the one giant on 205 Live that can work that style. And to me, he's floundering on the Raw roster. And, if you can get aside from the weight of Apollo Crews, man, he could work with those cruiserweights, I think, tremendously well. And this was a perfect example of that.
Yeah, and he would fit in perfectly against someone like a Neville. Maybe that would be a good program for him. But what I'm really enjoying is Titus O'Neil is actually starting to grow on me in this role of trying to build the Titus brand. I think he's found his niche more as in that role than an in-ring competitor. He seems to be connecting better anyways.
So your overall reaction to Extreme Rules, thumbs up, down, in the middle?
I'll give it a slight thumbs up because I was really impressed with that main event match. I thought the main event blew everything else out of the water, except for maybe the Cruiserweight match, which was excellent as well. But because of that match and because of the way it went off the air, sometimes, the last thing you remember is what sticks with you. I'll give it a slight thumbs up.
Yeah, I'll go 20 degrees above, thumbs in the middle. I thought, the top 2 matches really good and a fun kickoff match, I felt. All right, our DVDs. We did our contest last week where you could enter on the Law message board and guess the exact time that the main event Fatal 5-Way would go. And our winner was A-Rob, who guessed 29 minutes and 15 seconds, right on the dot. That was the exact time. So he is the winner, and we're also going to give out 2 to our runner-ups, Vito81, who guessed 28:57, and Chum Cheese, 28:45. Gotta love usernames.
I wonder if he's related to Chumpstain.
Could be. Maybe a distant third cousin.
Yeah. Okay.
So you folks will be getting your copies of the WrestleMania 33 DVDs, and Jimmy and I will be back next week because, of course, there's about 5,000 WWE pay-per-views over the next 2 months. The next being in St. Louis with Money in the Bank. So Jimmy and I will be going through that entire card. And until then, you can go to liveaudiowrestling.com to check out all of our latest interviews, including Kenny Omega, which is up there now. And you can follow him at Jimmy Korderas. Also catch him on Aftermath in Canada on Sportsnet 360. And myself, Outlaw Radio, and we'll speak with you ahead of Money in the Bank.